Hello and welcome to Union Chapel Church's practical colour demonstration where we're going to paint a strawberry bird using watercolour and graphite pencil and a little bit of white gouache, and I'm going to use cold pressed watercolour paper for this one. So just going to pause the recording while I swap the cameras around. So this is our Strawberry Finch, the photograph that we're going to use as inspiration for the painting. I'm going to make it a lot redder, I think, than it is in the picture. And I've got a pan watercolours and I've got some tube watercolours which I'll put out onto this palette if I'm going to use them as well. And also I've got some white gouache. So starting with a pencil, which I've put somewhere over there. Let me just grab it. So I'm going to use a mechanical pencil, which is one of these. It's quite fine because I'm going to do sort of some featheriness. And I've got cold pressed paper. You might want to use smooth if you want a kind of smooth effect. So just starting, I'm going to just go straight into the outline of the bird, and I'm going to kind of fill the page with it. So it's got quite a big beak, this one. And he's quite, I'm making mine a little bit fatter than it is on there. And I might just add a couple more feathers, so have it coming right down to the bottom there. Then I don't want to put too much detail on with the pencil, but I will just put things like the eye, bearing in mind that when you put pencil down, graphite pencil will show. So these marks are going to show because the watercolour generally is quite translucent or transparent. So just being aware of like how hard you press your pencil kind of will determine, you know, if you want it to be very light, you could use a harder pencil like a 2H or something. This is quite soft. I think it's a B or something like that. So when I press quite hard, it shows, you know, quite strongly. And then what I'm going to do, because I'm going to make the whole bird a bit redder than he is on the picture. So I wanted to put the feathers in, exaggerate the feathers a bit, the shapes of the feathers. So I'm going to put them in by pressing quite hard with my pencil, so I've got quite a lot of feathery marks showing. And then I'm going to put in the feet just to give it context. So he's grasping the branch. That will just give it kind of a bit of context. And then the other foot you can see comes in just under the body there. It's almost like a perfect photograph because everything's in the, you know, in proportion and everything. I got the shape a bit wrong on the body, so I am just going to change that. I'm just going to get my rubber. Because it's a bit, it sort of sticks out a bit too far. Although I might keep it, actually make him a bit of a pregnant bird. I think I might actually exaggerate it a bit. Okay, so I'm going to put in a little bit of featheriness. All right, so yeah, it's a little bit hunchy and a little bit fat, but that's all right. And then if I'm going to draw the branch going off behind, I want to make sure I get it in the same place. So I'm going to imagine continuing the line just to make sure that's something you can do. You know, you can follow the line, but lift your pencil off the paper as you go across what's covering it, just to make sure you get it in the right place. That can be a good thing to do. And then I think I'm just going to have a bit of fun and add some stars, or you can put shapes or stars or something. I just want to kind of make this a bit funky. I don't know. Let's just have some fun kind of putting in a different color in the background or something, make him stand out. Okay. Right, so that's enough of that. So now I'm going to get ready to start adding some paint. So this is where you need to sort of pause for a minute and have a little think about where you're going to start. So what I think I'm going to do, I'm just going to draw in a little bit more of this featheriness here, because I want that to stand out a bit. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some of the red. I'm just going to draw in some more feathers because I had an idea of making the tips of the feathers here redder than they are on here, and using like a gold. I've actually got a nice gold watercolor. So I was going to use a combination of those things. So what I'm going to do first of all is look for all the reds in my bird. So I've got the beak, I've got the around the head, the eye, just under the beak. There's a bit on the chest, and there's this bit down here, and that's all that's really there. You know, it's quite a lot around the head, but that's all that's really there on this bird. But what I want to do is I'm going to add some more red into the other feathers and kind of exaggerate the reds. And you need to think about what kind of red you want to use. I mean, in the picture, it's not as deep as alizarin crimson, but it's not a pinky red like opera rose. It's not really as bright, although there is a bit of cadmium, but I think rose madder hue is probably going to be the closest. So I'm going to put a bit of that out onto my palette, and then what I'm going to do is put out a bit of cadmium red as well, because that's more of an orangey red, because there are bits where it's more orange. And then I'm going to put the other one I'm going to put out is opera rose, which is a much pinker, very, very bright. I mean, it's a beautiful color. It's like one of my favorites. So what I'm going to do is now add those, and I'm going to just use a round brush, which means a pointy brush. This is a number 10, and I'm going to get quite a lot of water on my brush, and I'm just going to, I've got this rose madder, I'm going to mix it with a bit of opera rose. I'm starting with the beak, but I want it to be quite watery, so I just picked up a big lot of water on my brush. Maybe slightly too much. It's starting to get quite dark, so I'm going to pop the light on. Hopefully that will get rid of the shadows. So now we've got the beak. And then I'm going to use the same colour for the bit on the chest. And then coming around, using the tip of my brush to create kind of featheriness. And then what I want to do is wet my brush again a bit and pick up some of this cadmium. So I'm going to feed it in, just feed it in a little bit, working wet into wet. What I want to do is bring out that chest beyond the line. Because I'm adding it really quite thick, the paint, and putting it down almost as thick as it is in the tube, you can see that's actually covering up the pencil line. So if you want to do that, that's something you can do. And then going to just water it all down a little bit. It's getting a little bit too thick. So I'm just adding lots of water. And then I'm going to just go into the eye, because that's very red, and there's black. I've got to put the black on afterwards. And then above the eye there's all this red, it's very bright. So you can see, because I've used a round brush, that the tip of the brush makes quite nice feathery shapes kind of automatically. So if you want to kind of create that effect, you can do that. So this is all very, now whatever I do not want to touch into the beak, because where I've put the beak colour in, it's really, really watery. So if I touch into that with this other wet paint, it's going to just all go everywhere. It will sort of bleed into the colour that I'm putting on the front of the face, and I want to keep that separate. So just being very careful to leave a margin, leave a little gap between the beak and the top of the head. And then there are all these kind of feathery bits. I'm not worrying about the white spots because I'm going to add them afterwards using the white gouache. So I'm just adding these spotty bits, feathery bits. And they come right across the head. And then I'm going to add the brown on here. I'm going to add with gold. I'm going to do that later when it's all dried a bit. So now I'm going to exaggerate the red in the tips of the feathers on here. So I'm going to just add those in, the tips. And then this part, which is red obviously on here, I'm going to add a little bit more Opera Rose into it, because it's a slightly different kind of red, and I'm going to exaggerate and have more red on my picture than is in the photograph. So I'm going to make more of those feathers, kind of exaggerate it a bit. Okay, and then I'm going to put in more than is, so now I'm just using my imagination a bit. I'm going to look at the whole thing and add more bits of red, because I want it to look a bit like a big strawberry. So I'm going to add more red than is there. in the picture. I might even come down here and make this feather red too, and kind of bring it up in line. And now this is where you could then just add some water. Because it's still wet, the watercolour, it will kind of bleed into the area. And then I'm going to get my tissue or my cloth, which I've dropped onto the floor, and wrapping this around my finger, I'm going to do some lifting out to get back to some of the white paper, because I do want to put some goldy colours in there. And then I'm going to do the same a little bit with the head, where I've got the paint on my, from lifting it out down here, there's some on there, so I'm sort of printing it on, and that creates a nice bit of texture. So I'm just, you can actually see my fingerprint, or is it the lines of the, it's the lines of the cotton, kind of making these sort of feathery lines. That's quite nice. So I'm just going to add those bits here and there. Okay, so I'm happy with that. My next thing to do, well, that's, I'm going to let that all dry a bit, and I'm going to just do the branch. So the branch, I want to make a sort of mauve brown colour. So I've got some dark brown on my pan, and then I'm going to add some alizarin crimson to it and some blue, and I'm going to make it quite fairly pale. So I'm just filling that in. That's like you know, it's just like colouring in, but I'm leaving specks of white to give it a little bit of texture, so I'm not filling it in solid, just kind of doing it a bit scumbly. And then I probably don't want to do too much more. I don't want the branch to be very dominant, but I didn't want to leave it a colour, so making sure I've got a little margin here. I'm not going to let the colours bleed together if I can help it. Maybe just create a little bit of tonal value by making a bit of a darker line at the bottom. While it's still wet, I can feed that darker line a little bit of intensity there. That just gives it a kind of impression of a bit of a 3D dimensional thing happening. Then I'm going to wet my brush again. And I want to add lots and lots of water to some cadmium, because I'm going to, I'll just lift that out. I'm going to do the claws, and they're quite a pale orange. They're going to bleed into the branch a bit. I'm going to lift that out a bit. I'm going to lift it out a little bit along it to make it a bit paler. And I'm going to leave it like that. Okay. And then I've got this gold. So what I want to try out now is putting some of this gold down. Oops. It's actual gold. It's Daniel Smith Luminescent, Iridescent Gold. So I'm just going to see what happens. I moisten it a little bit, but still going to have it fairly thick. I might do the stars with it as well, and just see what happens when I add it here and there on the bird. Don't want to lose all that nice texture of the so being a bit careful where I put it. Okay, and then with your round brush, because it's a pointy tip, you want to do, say, the tips of a star. You just move your brush around. So you just point the tip into the tip of the star and then press down, and you can fill in the star. Like I always say, let the brush do the work. You just can do it quite quickly when you just use the tip of the brush. It's already the shape, and just press down to fill. So this part, I want to do that. I'm going to do that a similar colour to the tree branch, and now the rest of it has started to dry, so it's going to bleed ever so slightly, but nothing like as much as it would if you did it, you know, if I'd done it straight away. And then you've got a little bit of that colour coming down along here, and there is a little bit of it. I'm going to put a tiny bit of it. You know, mine's much redder and more strawberry-like than the photograph. It is much darker in the photograph, this brown, but I don't want it to be like that on my picture, so I'm doing it slightly differently. And then for filling in the eye, so the eye is very dark. I'm actually going to switch brushes now and go for a smaller round brush to tackle that bit. It's still very wet, that bit of red that I put in there, so I think I'm going to lift it out if I can find my, where did my cloth go? I'm just going to pause to find my cloth. Hang on. Right, so I found my cloth, and I'm just going to blot the eye there. Because I want to do this dark part. So when I mixed the branch colour, I used dark brown, dark blue, and alizarin. So I'm doing that again, but I'm going to make it more dark. So I'm going to add more just thicker pigment. And so you can see it's quite flowy, but it's also quite thick. And then I'm saturating my tiny brush with that, and then I'm just going to fill in around the eye. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it up to this head part, which is still wet, and the beak part, which is still wet. Whoa. And then, so then they'll kind of bleed into each other, and you'll then, that creates a bit of a, you know, kind of interesting effect. And then I'm going to lift out the beak a bit, so you can see the line a bit. And then I'm going to go back to this dark colour on my palette, and I'm going to just do a little line under here and a little bit of featheriness, and then the same under here and the same above. And lift up more of that pigment. Okay, so I don't want to overdo it too much, so I'm being a bit careful. And then the actual sort of pupil of the eye, I'm going to get some quite thick, and I'm going to just go around it like this. So that's got the eye. I'm just going to put a little bit more featheriness. Now I've got this little brush. Quite like what it does with the, you can make quite kind of feathery, thin effects if you press very lightly. So I'm just going to do that just to get a bit of featheriness happening here and there. Okay, so now for the spots. So to make this look more like a strawberry, before I do the spots, I'm just going to put a little bit more red in some areas. Okay, so now I'm going to get my white gouache. I'm actually going to move that picture because I'm running out of space on my palette. Put a big blob on there, and this is the part where you might want to, if you want to, oh, I've missed out one of my stars. If you want to protect your picture from splats, and you want it to go in a very specific place when you put the splats down, that's something that you can do. You can sort of mask off an area with a piece of cardboard or something. I personally like it when it kind of goes everywhere, so I'm just going to leave it. But if you want to be protective and make sure it goes in a specific area, you can cut a section out of a piece of cardboard and hold that over while you flick, and it'll go on the cardboard and not on the rest of the. Now, so this is very watery, see it's almost dripping, it is dripping off quite a lot when I hold it up. See that? So it's quite watery, but it's also, there's quite a lot. And so I'm just going to hold my brush horizontally in line with the paper and just go tap it. Ooh. Ooh. Now on the eyes, it's very specific where there are these, I'll show you again, there are these actual spots, like quite specific, and again across the front. So I've made this kind of splatty effect, which is doing some really nice things, but I also want some more specific spots. So I'm going to get a bit thicker paint on my brush and just add those. There's some like under the eye and above the eye. Oh, that was a bit too much. So just here and there you might want to put some more defined. It's only going to work properly where it's properly dry, the watercolour. So it's something you might want to come back to if yours is very super watery. And then you could, you know, you could spend quite a long time sort of playing around with that. And then the last thing you might want to do, I'm going to wait till it's all dry before if I do, but you might want to put a little bit of background in, the colour sort of in the background. So just lifting that out again. Right, so there's your strawberry bird. I don't know if you can see it better with the light or without. Tell. That might work better. So there you go. How to paint a strawberry bird using red and gold.